So this is the Wy'rded world, and yes, there is a pause there, and that's very important for people to know. This is why the pauses exist in the language of the world of Zyathica. So when you see two U's together, for example, like in Thu'ul, it is not Thu'ul, it is Thu'ul, is how it is pronounced, right? So you give a little pause there. So in this case, it is not the Wy'rded world, it is the Wy'rded world. And Wy'rded means corrupted in some ways, right? And so this is the foundational things that we tried to do to really make Zyathica feel like it is real, is to carry it into language and carry it into song and carry it into lore. And, you know, perhaps someday yours truly might write a novel in this world. And I'm looking forward to that day.
Ooh,
it is in my heart.
I would love that.
It is in my heart to do so. And part of that was making it foundationally realistic, fantastically real, right? And that is the battle that we always face, which is why sometimes if I push back on you on a contribution or something like that, it is only because we are trying to maintain the integrity of the world that we have founded together. And that is the goal. So this is the Wy'rded world, Cyclopaedia Zyathica Volume 1, made in 2018 and sold for the first time at Gen Con in 2019. And in the beginning of the book, there is a section called the historical account, right? The historical account of the Wy'rded world. And it is taken from a book, which I have written more of, it's just never been published, called the Ventenium Alunax. The Ventenium Alunax sort of chronicles the history of all that became once Avo-Va determined to speak the way of all things, right? And so this is the magic of the world, is that it has a history that is really well defined and understandable. And it is a tumultuous history and a fearful history, but it is also a marvelous history for an adventure that you'll take your players on. So, Camera Mandy, what would you like me to do? You want to read just the first little section? Is that what you'd like me to do? And then we dive into this? Is that the plan?
Sure. Read it.
All right, my friends. So Camera Mandy has also roped me in. I am going to read the entire section of this, and we're going to put it up in a little thing, right? We're going to not now.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yes,
just to be clear, we are doing it in podcast format.
Yes. So people who want to get this, and people who have not heard this, but this is a pretty good accord, and I think Camera Mandy, you read it for the first time. Really read it, right?
Yeah, for the first time last
and you
night.
loved it, yes?
Now I've listened to you read this like 3 times, but for the first time last night, I read all 20 pages. I was only going to read the first 5, but I was like, this is so good.
She got caught up.
I did. I have, and I also marked up my book. I did the unthinkable.
Notes. It's like you're in college.
Yeah, here, you should show mine.
Here, let me see this, Camera Mandy. Oh, I don't want to tear it. Look at the construction. It does not fall apart. Yes, look at that. It's marvelous. Look at Camera Mandy's crazy notes. It says, Bug Alphinius here. Really?
Anyway, all right, go ahead.
All right, I shall begin with the beginning, and then we will do the book club.
Okay.
This is short, my friends, but it is marvelous. In the beginning of all, before anything existed, there was only Avo-Va, the dreamer of the first dream. Avo-Va had always been and would always be. This was his lot. For eons he had slept alone in the nothingness, but when he awoke from his slumber, the dream remained. It lit his consciousness, colored his imagination, and gave vision to all that he would soon bring into being. 'Tis then that Avo-Va spoke the way of all things, which is the law that makes all creation possible, and following that, shaped the forces that would imbue every aspect of that which was to come. He named this energy the Zyanthus, which is also called the Everflow, and infused it, along with the 4 elements, into the emptiness of the void. Thus began the great making. Raw, unbridled power of unimaginable magnitude tore through the nothingness, thundering and shaking and careening in the void space, as no thing had done before, nor would ever do again. It was the cataclysm of creation, and all that came to be was born of this. But not everything was as the dreamer intended. Yes, Camera Mandy, I'm still pleased with this, even after all these years, yes. So, Camera Mandy, you were the one who wants to kind of guide this, but the plan is we're going to tell folks this week what we're going to read next week. And you are most welcome to sort of delve into that a little bit. And then hopefully the way we've got everything set up, Camera Mandy's phone is working. I don't forget my phone. We don't have a cursed fly flying around. The monitor isn't flickering on and off, and other strange things are going on, right? Like this thing going on and off. Anyway, so when we have all that, we will actually bring some folks onto the show every week. And if you're interested in being on the stream and you'd like to be part of the book club, we want to know, because we want to bring you on remotely, and you'll be part of the discussion for the book club. Right, Camera Mandy? That's the plan, yes?
And
all right.
Even if you can't do it live, if you guys read the section that we're talking about and want to contribute some ideas or some questions, you could just shoot me over a video clip of like a little cell phone video even, and just shoot us over a video clip of you asking the question, like around like no less or no more than like a minute or so, and then we can play it and then talk.
Really, I mean, questions and little thoughts. So 30 seconds is great, and those are good sound bites that we can put up. And it's really easy, right? Just put the dang phone up there if you have a phone, right? Or if your phone isn't broken, right? So if you have, hopefully one of those two things you're not experiencing, right? Neither of those things actually. And you just take a little quick video and you can send it to Camera Mandy, and we'll put you up that way too. So this is the idea of the book club. Hope people like it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And for people who love the lore, I think this is going to add to the lore.
Or you can also just message us the question.
Yes, and that's what we're planning on right now, because as we're going through this, you are most welcome to message a question or thought or an idea. Camera Mandy's keeping her eye on that stuff. Camera Mandy, you want to start this little book club out? And please, friends, ask questions, throw out ideas in the chat. We'll do our best to answer them quickly and give some more breath and life to the lore.
Yeah, and if you are interested in seeing anything in this book club, please let me know. Right now I just have some notes because we literally came up with this idea yesterday.
Yeah, well, we've been thinking about how to do it, right? This was the idea, because people have been asking, because we have a lot of lore, and it is a lot, and I admit it, and the books can be intimidating, right?
And I'm just going to say that it doesn't make it a little bit easier. It does not make it easier that things have 5 names.
So my friends, I just want you to understand something. The reason why we tend to use multiple names is, first of all, repetition in writing can be boring, right? So if you say the Zyanthu's every time you say magic, right, that kind of gets boring. So being able to say the Zyanthu's, being able to say the Everflow, being able to say the flow, right, which is normal if you think about human beings, right? We shorten things, we do all this kind of stuff. And then, be able to say those 3 different things, make it a little less repetitious when you're writing about it. But beyond that, it also makes it feel more real, right? So the Zayandun, which is also called the Underdelve, which is also can be called the Far Deep, even though the Far Deep really describes the lower areas. So we'll get more into that as we delve into the Underdelve, so to speak, in the future. All right, Camera Mandy, let us do it.
Okay, I have a question from Stacey right off the bat.
Stacey, hello, my friend.
Chapter 1 speaks to a comprehensive listing of smoking leaves in Wy'rted Westfordestia.
Yes.
I have not been able to find it in Wy'rded World 1. Where would this list be found?
So the truth of the matter is that we had intended to put this together. I actually have it. We wanted to do a whole little tome on material components, pipe leaves and weeds, and and there's all kinds of them. There's waffle wens, there's Sundestian red. There's so many wonderful pipe leaves and weeds, and truth is, Stacey, there's been so much stuff we've been doing. I just haven't gotten to it, but it needs to get done. And I will put it on the list, and I will enhance its delivery, because it needs to get delivered. I will put it on the list. Oh, this is when the Camera Mandy has it on the list. You get dogged.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. She's like a hound dog with a bone when she wants something. She won't let it go. Yes, never.
Take a deep breath.
The damn fly.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Okay, here are some of my questions. Okay, so first off, the Eterniverse is like a solar system.
It's like the universe.
Okay.
It is like all encompassing of all of the planets, the solar systems, the various galaxies, and all of that stuff that exists out there. Is similar to our world in that regard. So the Eterniverse is all of that.
Okay, and then does that mean that there's more planets out there like Zyathica that with life
Camera Mandy
on them?
You know that is a tale still in the telling.
I did not know.
There are many people who want us to kind of move in the future a little bit towards the sort of the planescape thing, right? And certainly we have denoted very clearly in some of our materials that, in particular in West Verdestia, that the Eterns are rumored to at least have had one skyship called Galganeth that apparently was able to reach beyond the gravitational pull, if you will, of Zyathica. So if you haven't read about that, it's magnificent. It is a wonderful image as well of Galganoth that is in the West Verdestia tome.
By talking about the Eterns, you are moving ahead in the book club.
Oh, sorry, I apologize.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Okay, so the way of all things. Do you have any like specifications on what this is?
So many have talked about this, and we have talked about it a little bit in the past. So there are 13 known cycles of magic, at least if the rumors of what happened before the woe are true. The 10th, 11th, and 12th cycles, which are the most powerful spells that were ever contrived, right, are magnificent and totally unattainable now because of the corruption of the Xanthus and the fact that the flow was broken, was pulled apart into 3 separate flows, which is something that is to come, which we will speak about later in the book club. But because of these factors, the Xanthus is now not as powerful as it once was, and spells of the 10th, 11th, and 12th cycles are no longer achievable. The spell that Galcianthros is said to have cast is a 12th cycle spell that is only theorized. They don't even know the machinacia of it, right? The formulae. And it is called the Unmaking. And this spell is probably the most powerful of the 12th cycle spells. But there is a 13th cycle. It contains one spell. It is called the Way of All Things. And that is what Avova spoke when the making was begun. Is that not marvelous, Cameramandy?
It is. I love reading about this.
Yes, the way of all things, yes. And so that's why when you see things like all things capitalized in certain places, this is why, because it is referring back to the making and the creation.
So, okay, so you have like a little forward here before we start into the history.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, so you say that.
By the way, are folks liking this? Is this because this is a kind of a test? And if you're enjoying it, please put a little note in there, say yes. And honestly, if you think this is kind of boring, we'd like to hear that too. Honestly, because we want this stream to be fun for everyone. We're doing our best to really vamp it up, and as Camera Mandy said, revamp it and make it even more fun. We think a lot of people are having fun. I'm loving Saturday mornings now. So if we need to do other things, or if you have other ideas, we want to hear them.
And
Please.
If you don't want to put it in chat, because you don't want to like be like, you guys suck.
Yeah, you don't want to be
chat.
the downer.
Yeah.
You know, yes.
You can always message us privately, and as long as you are kind with your criticism, we love it.
Even if you're not kind, just give it to us.
Send all the not
you
kind criticism to
dirtbags, you suck. Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so in the forward, you mentioned that it's the year 1212 SC. So I'm curious what SC stands for.
SC stands for Sulionic Constant. And it is the form of keeping time. If you read in the Wy'rded World, I believe it is chapter 3, which is the cosmology and the keeping of time. I believe it is chapter 3. I need to check here just to make sure. Yes, the cosmology and the counting of days, which I believe is chapter 3, and it begins, it's right here. And in here, it will explain how the calendar was changed by the woe of ruin, how time was actually affected, many things that are quite interesting, how Zaragost now exists, the dark moon that is quite interesting, why the red star perhaps has even appeared. So there's lots of cool stuff in the cosmology and counting of days. So there's even a clack, right, which is this sort of what's gone on before, which is fun to read. So if you check that out, you will find out that that stands for Sulionic Constant. And if it was a year prior to the SC, right, which is before the woe, it is BW, which is, of course, before woe.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do like the idea that this world has been around for millennia, and then it's kind of similar to the way that our world is, and that our history is only so far documented back. So, you know, the history
and Cameron, I'm sorry, please go.
No.
And the history is affected by the woe because so many things were destroyed, so many libraries, so much institutional knowledge, if you want to call it that, of the world, right? And so the woe really set the entire, if you want to call it this, it set them back to the Stone Age. And in fact, you know, magic was, in the early times, people barely even practiced it. There was so much fear after the War of Ruin by practitioners, right? Magists and sorcerers. These people were persecuted in the post-war time. They were considered to be an anathema, and even still to this day, there is much prejudice towards those who use these magistrations, right? The casting of spells. And so this is what's created such an interesting, thing going on, right? And that was the goal, right, of the storytelling, was to create this.
On that note, I really like the sentence that you had about Thorvin Galarak, who bent his...
Read it real quick so everyone can hear.
With some chronicles from the infancy of the mortal races were spotty and difficult to decipher at best, the efforts of the Ethernic archmaid Thorvin Galarak who bent his considerable... I'm terrible at reading. I don't know why.
Come on, cameraman dude.
Who bent his considerable magical talents towards the study and manipulation of time, produced a far clearer picture of the Wy'rded world's tumultuous history and filled in many of the archival gaps during the darker ages of the past.
Yes. So some of the Ethernic, the Ethernic mages survived, right? They didn't all die, right? So and some of them were very much opposed to Galcianthros and the groups that were doing this stuff, the things that were going on. In fact, the dwarves and other peoples, for the most part, actually left the Ethernic Empire before the War of Ruin because of this playing around with the Netherflow that would existed in that time, right? And so there was a lot of consternation prior to the woe. Perhaps someday we will even go back and visit the times of the Etherns, which is very exciting to ponder.
I have some cool pictures here.
Oh yeah,
that
put them up.
Share.
Yes, let's do that.
I know that we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves when we're talking about.
But what about questions? Have anybody in the chat got any questions?
Kentori wants to know if there's an equivalent to dinosaurs.
The world prior to the woe, and right now this is where the lore kind of lives, is that most of the monsters, the real true monsters, sort of came into being as part of the corruption of the Zyanthus. So there was creatures and monsters, right? From a dinosaur standpoint, we are looking at that. We have not actually formulated the finality. I love them, by the way. I love the idea of them. And having a prehistoric world. This is being discussed about how would we do a prehistoric sort of Zyathica as sort of the peoples that were created by the gods sort of began their journey and learning and growing and all of that stuff. And so there is some talk about that. We actually want to have sort of places where prehistory may still hold sway. There is some thoughts of the jungles of Zustrenia and the jungles of Sundestia that are very primordial in their structures, that we might have some of these sort of prehistoric beasts that survived. And maybe some of them were corrupted right after the woe. We think it adds a lot of interestingness to it. So hopefully people like that, but we are definitely looking at that as we continue to flesh out the history.
So this image here is in the future. This is after the events of...
So this is the Ethernic Empire right here, yes. Right? So this is pre-woe. And this gives you an idea of honestly some of the lesser, the lesser world, right? And actually in this artwork...
This is pre-woe, but is this post the first event? What was?
Oh, yes, of course, the Gods' War.
So it was in between the Gods' War and...
So the Gods' War happened when the Four Lords of Corruption came into being. We'll read more about that as we continue in the book club. But the Four Lords of Corruption came into being and caused the Nether War, or the Gods' War. And this is where Avo'Va sacrificed himself, merged his essence with the Everflow, the Zyanthus, the magic of the world, right? And merged his essence into that, was able to put the corruption lords in this prison called the Never Place, and was actually able to stop the horrible corruption of the world and the Eterniverse. But more than that, the merging of Avo'Va's essence into the flow, which was one flow at that time.
Next to the Never Place, where you say a prison where they could be no escape, I literally wrote, really, we will see.
Yes, well, we will see as we read in the book. Because in the Ventenium Alunax, it speaks to this as well.
Yes.
But here is the thing. So they are imprisoned. Avo'Va's essence is now in the Everflow, and the Everflow is more powerful than it has ever been. So even before the gods war because Avo-Va took his essence and put it in there, right? This is the beginnings of the Eternic civilization as they began to understand that spells of the 10th, 11th, and 12th cycles were much more attainable following Avo-Va's sacrifice. And so this is when the flying cities, actually in that previous image that you have there, which shows, I believe, Resplensia, I actually wanted, and still am probably going to do it, to have a flying city in the sky. So I'm probably going to have this artwork retouched a little bit and add a little bit of added to it. Because I think it'd be wonderful to have maybe Eternivus, or maybe Amasthal, or one of Eternivius, excuse me, or maybe Amasthal, or one of the others in the sky, flying above, or maybe even Galganeth, or perhaps both.
And then like a note on that too, like, because like again, this is kind of where some of the names get a little confusing. So where's Resplendia on the map?
So Resplensia?
Like, what is it now?
Is Crooks.
Oh, okay. So if you look...
Resplensia is right here in the center. Oh, yes, you have it up, so I will do that. I will not even deal with that. So Resplensia was the continent of the Eterns. This was where all of their magics and all of their empire was centered. And they had pretty much everything they needed there. Their population was not so huge that they had to go to other places, even though they technically pretty much conquered most of the world, right? Not the entirety of it, right? This is how the Arachnoids ended up in Nordruka, and they were really oppressed. And this explains their anger and frustration towards those who really they blame, even though they were not to blame anymore, right? This is where the Oni and others in Estrenia will come into play when we go there. This is where other mythological beings, the giants, were sort of part of the empire, then they were not. So there's much more lore to come. But in the center of the world was, at least on the map, was Resplensia. And this is where all of their magic was focused. And when the Woe of Ruin happened and the magics were corrupted, of course, Crooks suffered unlike any other place on the face of the planet. Resplensia was cast down. And now this is the most fearful locality, without question, in the entirety of the world. But it also might hold the secrets of how to save the world from the corruption that is destroying it. So we will see as the tales continue, but someday we are going to visit Crooks. Indeed we are. The reason why we're beginning with the lore, even though most people have kind of gotten through this, is we think it's kind of important, as I mentioned earlier. So this kind of sets the stage, this Chronicles of the Ventenium Alunax, which is in volume 1. And it speaks to the beginning of creation, right? And as you read through these pages, right, you read through Calignis Echoes and the Birth of Doom, you begin to see the strategy that we put in place as authors, that we wanted to have sort of tension in the godly realms as well. So traditionally, the tension has been primarily between the gods of evil, neutral, and good, right? That's been traditional. And we sort of took it a different direction. And that was our intentional, right? And so we created the Four Lords of Corruption, which was sort of outside of the pantheon entirely and completely not. That damn fly is back, cameraman. That damn fly. There's a fly.
I don't think it's probably not the same one.
Yeah, it's
or
probably
maybe it is, because we did talk about it.
How long? Does anybody know how long flies exist? Yes. If anyone puts that up in the chat, I'll be impressed with you right now. In fact,
oh God, it's over here. Okay, why did you bring it to my attention?
I'm sorry about that, cameraman. Anyway, so Avo-Va, speaks the way of all things, all right, which is the 13th level spell, the only one that exists because there is nothing beyond it, right? The cast of the 13th level is basically one spell called the Way of All Things. And that makes all creation possible. So Avo-Va speaks that and then creates the Zyathica to energize and power everything and infuses that, the Zyathica, along with the four elements into the void, right? And so this begins the great making, right? And that's what you read in here as you go through it. And then, of course, there's this magnificent four sparks of corruption that appear on the fringe of the void. And they begin to go off into their own place. And Avo-Va didn't really notice them, right? So again, now we have begun the creation of the foundation, right? The foundation of the creation, if you will, and this tension that begins already, right? And for those of you who've been peeking, right, and knowing and reading things, there's another probably deific sort of thing that's coming, which we have not really released yet, which is this 9 that are coming, that are returning, right? And there's been a lot of speculation because there are 8 dead gods, but there are 9 that are coming back, right? And these are antithetical probably to the Lords of Corruption and probably to the Pantheon as well. And so we really set up ourselves, I think, a very magnificent sort of eldritch horror thing with these 9, and then sort of bring the antithesis of Ova and the creation of the 72 gods in with the corruption lords, and all 3 of them are probably going to be at odds. And that's the wonderment of what I think is coming in regards to the Pantheon and in regards to the foundation that we are building. So then you go through, the birth of doom, right? Anyway, and all seemed well and good. Yet amongst the purity of the Maker's creation festered a wretched impureness. Deep within the everflow, a twisted and terrible thing existed, a defilement that had gone unnoticed since it had been placed there long, long ago. The small current of unadulterated foulness, which had been embedded in the Zyanthus by the 4 lords of corruption, pulsed deep within the flow as venom running through the veins of a doomed man. The gods of magic found it first: Evoke, goddess of light magic; Infiorni, god of raw magic; and Sha'ada, the goddess of dark magics. These then shared their discovery with the other gods in their respective deific realms. Without knowing the properties of this new aspect of the everflow, the 3 gods of magic began to test and probe it, seeking to learn its purpose. But no matter how they tried, no matter what magical employments they enjoined, they were foiled in their attempts to do so. And 'twas then that the whispers began. Yes, and so this is where the beginning of the corruption of the gods was happening. Are there questions? Because I want to make sure that I'm dealing with these, as folks are going on here with this. So this is where the cameraman, any questions in there or not yet?
No, I still have the ones from Belinda that we'll talk about in a little bit.
All right. So then you can see that the whispers happen, right? So this is on page 6, right? And then as you continue through, you begin to learn of the fouling of creation, right? And then the great betrayal, which speaks to this idea of what happened as the gods of evil were betrayed and how the gods' war happened, right? And this is when the lords of corruption finally reveal themselves. So this is on page 8, and it says, "For the gods of evil had been deceived," in the last line of the great betrayal.
I do like all of the layers of deception that go into this, and I do also like, you can start to see how, so basically these 72 gods, obviously you have to have balance between all these gods. So, like with all things, we have all the different categories.
Indeed.
And then seeing how the evil gods, or is that what we call them?
Well, the thing is, we even gave a little latitude to the evil gods because what we did was, because as more complex societies were formed, right, people needed to follow more rules, right? They needed to be, not so sort of, chaotic and going your own way and all of this kind of thing and doing bad things, right, and all of that kind of stuff. And so the worshipers of evil kind of got pushed to the side. So this is what caused the evil gods to get frustrated. They're like, come on, y'all, we're part of this pantheon too, and you neutral and good gods are sort of ganging up on us, right? And our worshipers are getting kind of kicked out and blah, 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 right? And so, that created its own tension between the neutral and good gods and the evil gods. And so in their frustration, this is why the whispers that went towards the evil gods were effective, because they felt slighted. They felt marginalized. Yes, pushed away. And that is why they enjoined the lords of corruption. Yes. Is that not marvelous, cameraman D?
No, I think it's really interesting. I also think I like the idea of the balance between gods. Of course, I don't love the idea of evil.
Well,
gods,
the thing is, in the end, you can't really have tails if you don't have bad.
If you don't have bad in them, you have to have that element of corruption in society. And anyways, I like the layers.
Great protagonists, are made great by antagonists.
I also think that there's always something to be said, and I think this is something you even say, that really everyone has shades of gray.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So it's not necessarily, maybe from our perspective.
No, the gods of evil, just like the gods of good and neutrality, created races and peoples, right? Mm-hmm. The gods of evil did the same. And it doesn't make sense to me. It never has. In fact, long ago, we walked away from this. It never made sense to me that individual races would sort of have a bent towards evil just because they were sort of created or crafted by evil gods. But yet, in the good God, the people good gods created, they also would trend to evil. So you need to have a spectrum across all of these different peoples because it makes more sense. And because it's way more interesting.
Yes.
It's just much more fun, right? And forget even the undertones of it, right? Which was, we want to sort of walk away from sort of any group being sort of fully evil. That's a good thing to walk away from anyway. But just from a tale standpoint, right? It makes a lot more sense. It's a lot more better. You know, that's what I think. You know, so.
Yes.
Anyway, let's continue.
Oh, can I just make one more note? Okay,
Yes.
so there's a line on page 5 about how the religions of Zyathica got established and how grand temples were raised in communities around the world to honor the mighty deities.
Yes.
So I know that we have some art out there, or if we don't have some art, we should make some art of some grand temples that are in ruins, or that some have stood the test of time.
So no, we are making more, you know, when we go to the Cyclopaedia Religica, right, which it's not named that yet, but that's kind of what we call it around here. When we go to that tome, we're going to speak to a lot of these kinds of things, even the histories, right, and all of that stuff, and some of the classes that we've brought forth that are somewhat unique to the churches, like the warders and others, right? And so we think people are going to love that, and because our take is, honestly, we don't care for resting. It's one of the few things that we really don't love so much in the new edition. And, you know, resource depletion and sort of running out of things is kind of part of the adventure. And it still happens, but we don't really like the idea of fight, rest, fight, rest, fight, rest, fight, rest. We don't really care for that. And we don't really like that clerics have sort of been marginalized in this new world as well. And what we really would have preferred to see was that clerics actually be improved rather than sort of them be made unnecessary. And so that is our goal as we move forward, is to really make clerics a wonderful and fun class again that people like to play. And also give them what a lot of people don't like to play about clerics, right, is that they basically have to sit around and be heal bots all the time. So we've got some ideas we think people are going to love, and we're going to take some input from our community, and we're going to carry this forward and see how it goes.
Absolutely.
Aha!
Okay, so let's go ahead and keep moving forward.
So the gods of evil had been deceived, right? This is, and then on page 8 it says, in the rise of corruption, in their blind quest for vengeance against their brothers and sisters, the evil gods had unleashed the four lords of corruption upon the creation by unsealing the fourth stream of the Zyathica, the nether flow. This horrid perversion of the Maker's plan had been sequestered deep within the Zyathica since being placed there by the four lords. In the millennia that followed, the four masters of corruption nurtured it, enhanced it, and used it to tap the power of the Maker while he slept. And this is very important to the entirety of this creation story, which is that literally the four lords had stuck something to the Lord, right, of all things, the creator of all things, this Avova, and began to siphon his power from him and taking it for themselves. And so this really changes the dynamic of the corruption lords and puts them at a different level than the gods, right? And so that is how this thing sort of danced forward as we moved into this. And then you read on chapter 9 that the gods suddenly were being suffering, right? In fact, I'll read this to you. So these were beings of evil at its greatest depths, hatred with no end, dispassionate desire for the destruction and ruination of all things, embodied in horrific visages and monstrously powerful bodies. Their only pleasure derived from the suffering of everything around them. The power of these beings was unending, their malice unquenchable, and each god knew there was no salvation from the ascendance of these four abominations of the creation. But then Sylvain, the Lord of Light and leader of the gods of law and goodness, stepped forward. His sword was as a flaming sun, and his shield as the hottest metal that ever knew existence. Swinging with his entire might, using all the power that remained within his godly body, he struck the Lord of Ruin, who is named Foendeus, severing his arm. For a moment, hope kindled in Sylvain's eyes. But then, as he watched, his sword slowly turned to ash and dust in his hand, and then his hand and arm followed, the ash spreading across his body, until, with but a single wail, the greatest of the gods of good was no more.
I really love that passage.
Yes, and when you, Cameramandy, when you see the image of Foendeus is missing his arm.
Yeah, because he was, I mean, you're getting ahead of yourself. Wait, this is the god that was reborn?
No.
Oh, no.
Well, Sylvain.
Oh, I got
Sylvain
you.
is probably, there's a lot of
Yes.
speculation because we haven't really revealed it yet. But Sylvain, of course, is one of the gods who perished in the Nether War, the Gods' War.
Right.
And there were 8 of them that perished. And now there's this idea of, you know, if you're reading the Red Star Rising campaign, of course, you know something about Flamarish. And I'm not going to do
Okay.
very careful about this. You know, a
Yes.
little bit about Flamarish and some things that are going on in there that that whisper towards this goings on. So it is magnificent. So
But yeah, I do love the idea that you think it's like as if you're watching this big blockbuster, this huge war happening, and you think Captain America or whoever, Thor, is about to take out the big baddie, and it's that moment of like, no. Yeah. So I love that.
Yes, it's one of those OMG moments, I think, right? It
Yes.
feels like it, right? I hope people love this. I am very enamored with this story because I think it really, without it, there is no Zyathica, not the way it is. And,
Okay.
and it is magnificent.
Okay, so the first question was about the mythos is something that I know most, if not all of Zyathica is aware of. And she is wondering if there's races out there that have different creationist stories that they've made themselves aside from these ones.
So that is quite possible, right? Because mythology is mythology, and of course the entire world was beaten back to the, whatever you want to call it, the Stone Age, right? With the woe of ruin. And so all manner of myth and tale could grow up in many different cultures. Of course, this is the true tale of corruption, of creation and the corruption of creation. But of course, it would be natural, I think, that would happen. So it's a great question, Belinda, and I concur with you that I think that in certain places and localities, you'd have all kinds of myth and legend, right? There are even people who worship Avova, even to this day in the world, right? Even though, as far as everyone knows, Avova is gone, dead, never to be again, right? So that's a great question. And it's certainly true that you would expect that different mythologies and different tales would arise.
Absolutely. And then, are there recreationist theories? Like enough time has passed that there are those who don't believe the history at all. Like,
yeah, undoubtedly, I would expect that there are people who have and people who have twisted it for their own purposes, right? There are people who will manipulate people with religion as well as they do it with anything else, right? And so those kind of nefarious individuals make up their own tales, and you know, there's a guy named Zoldothran Vildreen who tells everyone he is the deity incarnate, Avovar reborn, yes. So, you know, of course, you're absolutely right, Belinda. That would happen, right? That would occur.
And
but there is only one creation tale, and it is the true creation, right? Is how it works.
But I mean, even this one is told through the lens of somebody who used magic to go back in time to find all of these details.
Yeah.
So I could definitely imagine that people would not trust that person to tell the tale as it was.
Of course. And there could be little differences and nuances, which is the wonderment of the game, because that gives you room to move as a game master at your table, right? That is the magnificent thing of it.
Absolutely. And then also she was mentioning that she felt that there was a lot of influence from other sources that she had read that contributed to this. What influences did you use for the creation of the story, and how hard was it to separate from a retelling and find the fine line of really making it your own?
So this is always the question, right? Because so many people have done so many wonderful things, right? We did want a world that nodded to some of the great worlds that are out there, and especially because we were doing 5th edition, we wanted to have at least some familiarity to folks who are playing in other worlds that are associated with the 5th edition. And honestly, I played that at my table. Many of you have heard me say this before, that my world for many years was a very different, but certainly inspired by Ed Greenwood's magnificent Forgotten Realms. And Ed is one of my heroes. And so, but what we wanted was, there were some things we didn't want. we really wanted a pantheon that was very much pantheonic. We wanted clerics and holy warriors and all that stuff. They would have a devotion to a single deity because they are part of that church. But that church also is open and inviting to pretty much all of the gods that are within sort of their scope. So if you are a law and goodness, and you have a paladin of Radion, for example, right? There's absolutely no reason that Radion wouldn't bow just as deep a knee to evoke, right, in the sphere of law and goodness. And so we wanted this idea that, and you see this with the Hanatas, right? They have a number of deities that they hold especially dear, but everyone believes in all 72 of them. And some people might even, who are worried about something, perhaps Slay, who is the god of assassins, perhaps they are worried that there is an assassin coming after them. Perhaps they would go to Slay's temple and drop some coin in the box and say, Slay, please protect me from your, the one who wants to take my life, right? So this is the idea of the pantheon in Zyathica. And so a cleric who is devoted to one god is very much devoted to many gods, in maybe not quite the same way, but certainly elevates certain of them and vilifies others, right? And all of this stuff, but all of them are believed. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. We have a question from Renegade78, who I think, is that Renee?
I think it could be. I do not know off the top of my head.
Anyway, do you plan to publish a book on Zyathica deities with information on where they are worshipped?
Yes, and interestingly, as we produce the other continents as well, there's going to be some interesting takes on those that are based in the mythologies of those continents, right? So just like we mashed up East and Western Europe, North and Southern Europe. I mean, we went all the way pretty far east and we went pretty far west and tried to mash that up and make it our own, but we wanted to pick up the mythologies of those localities a little bit with our inspiration of those localities. That's the same that we want to do for Sundestia, which is going to be kind of a mashup of Africa and Egypt and the Near East. And that's what we're going to do with Estrenia, which is going to be a mashup of the this damn fly can remember. Yes.
Jeez.
I did take a shower this morning too, so it shouldn't be too much on my case. But anyway, the goal is to have this the influence of those mythologies in those areas. Like I said, I think last week, we don't really want Rakshasa and Jinn and these kinds of things running all over Zyathica and Verdestia. We want to have them more running all over the place, more in Sundestia, and maybe a little bit in Estrenia. But we're not going to, and just like we're not going to have Oni and those kinds of mythological creatures running all over Sundestia, they're going to be more in Estrenia, right? And we're going to try to take, Southeast Asian mythology, sort of take the mythology from Korea and China and Japan, and even sort of, southern Russia there, where there's, more the folks they're more influenced by those more what we call Eastern cultures. And we're going to try to bring all of that stuff to Estrenia. And just like when we move to Zustrenia, which is going to be more South America, Central America, and even a little bit of North America before the colonists and such from Europe came, and try to bring all of that and make that sort of mashed up in Zustrenia, so that we really have a nod to all the cultures as much as possible in a fantasy world, within our world, and then each place feels a little more unique and a little more interesting and a little more familiar, perhaps, to folks who want to go travel in those kinds of localities, right? So this is what we're excited about.
Greetings, Alphinius Goo, my dear friend. And Mistress Mandy, radiant as always, it seems. I am Zix Gramus, Archmage and head of the Thaumaturgy Division of the Darkenhaven University of Magical Arts. It seems to me that your fellowship of reverence to tomes and lore is hard-pressed without one of suitable amounts of objectivity and personal experience. So, I have been entertained by your stories and your recitations out of this interesting little tome detailing much of our world's history. It has provided a great deal of amusement. as well as being a good objective barometer of the sorry state that our world has fallen into. But I think that a short discussion on the Aethernic Empire, one of the most moving parts of our world's history since it has entered the Age of Mortals, perhaps it might be useful to comment on what life was like for the Aetherns, eh? Too much has been laid upon the Aethernic Empire. They have already paid for their sins. But for the actions of a few, it is important to remember that the average citizen of the Empire lived a life steeped in magic, but they lived life, as it were, much as we do today. But I think, Master Goo, perhaps it would be entertaining to have you give a description of what life was like for an Aethern. What great works they have. We know their floating cities, their vessel capable of leaving the face of Zyathica. The fact that the Zyathus infiltrated and penetrated every aspect of their society and touched every citizen's life in some way, shape, or form would be admirable, don't you think? Perhaps we could hear it from you, Master Goo. I grow tired of lecturing to students who have the comprehension of a gnat and the life expectancy out in the field of, well, perhaps it would be disheartening to go into that overmuch. But please, Master Goo, I look forward to hearing what you have to say about the Aetherns. This work touches on things a bit, but I think it might be very interesting to hear more from what you and I both know. So please, regale us. As always, I remain your humble servant, and look forward to being a part of this august society. Thank you in advance. Farewell, my friends.
Magnificent. Zixi! Yes, you are magnificent, my friend. Yes, I'm sorry about that last Zis game with the fireball and all of that stuff. But, you know, these things happen. You know, just how it occurs. Anyway, you are magnificent. Rob, that's fantastic. Yes, my friends, the Aetherns. This is part of the book club. Yes, this is part of Cameramandi's inspiration that she wished us to bring forward. To talk more about the lore, to give you more information, but also to bring it to you in such a way that it is digestible, rather than in 400 or 500 pages or whatever craziness that we always do. Yes, this is what we do. So, my friends, but damn it, Thomas, those damn books you just sent me are like, there's 1 billion pages of them. I don't even know how I'm going to get through them, and I'm a fast reader. Anyway, Zixi, I shall don my glasses.
Where we left off,
Yes,
because we're
go
definitely
ahead,
getting to the
Cameraman.
Aetherns
What
today.
page?
Well, we left off where the gods were starting to battle before
Yes, the Gods' War, which is called the Nether War.
and the god and the main god died.
Yeah, well, one of them. There was actually
The main good one.
Sylvain.
Thank you.
Yes, Sylvain actually dispatched Foendeuz's arm, which is still cut off to this day, if rumors are true. Yes, my friends, this is the case. So the war is going on. And I will read just a little bit.
Sorry, the reason I said the main god was because the line is the greatest of the
greatest
gods
of the gods of good.
Was no more.
The leader of the gods of good. Yes.
This is me distilling it down to my tiny brain version of it.
Yes.
All right.
And so, right, I will read this. The power of these beings, this is the lords of corruption. The power of these beings was unending, their malice unquenchable, and each god knew there was no salvation from the ascendance of these 4 abominations of the creation. But then Sylvain, the lord of light and leader of the gods of law and goodness, stepped forward. His sword was as a flaming sun, his shield as the hardest metal that ever knew existence. Swinging with his entire might, using all the power that remained within his godly being, he struck the Lord of Ruin, who is named Foendeus, severing his arm. For a moment hope kindled in Sylvain's eyes, but then as he watched, his sword slowly turned to ash and dust within his hand, and then his hand and arm followed, the ash spreading across his body, until, with but a single wail, the greatest of the gods of good was no more. 'Twas then that Anacrea, the leader of the 4, stepped forward. With the foulest of bile dripping from her lips, she proclaimed that all of creation was now the 4 lords' dominion, that the gods were now their slaves, and that Zyathica, and indeed the entire unific plane, was doomed. Then the 4 mocked the ever more enfeebled gods as they set about warping and corrupting the deific planes, the unific plane, and Zyathica in particular, with their withering touches. And it seemed that no hope remained. Yes, no hope. But then, this is called the Maker's Wrath. It is the next chapter. But then Avova, the maker of all things, an architect of the somethingness, awoke to the desperate pleas of his children. He cast his eyes about, and to his horror saw that all he had made was warping and twisting in the grasp of these four immeasurably powerful entities. And his grief was infinite, but his anger was greater. Avova rose up against the lords of corruption and fought with all of his immeasurable strength. The plains trembled and shook as the titanic forces of the 4 clashed against the Maker's might. The same power that had previously sculpted the entirety of the Eterniverse now thundered in his fists and roared from his lips. Yet the 4 were able to stand against the Creator's onslaught, using the Life-Giver's own power against him. With each assault he launched against the horrific beings, the 4 poured their twisted essence that they had stolen from him during this slumber into a devastating riposte. This consistently set him on the defensive, lest their repulsive impurity overwhelm him. This is very important, my friends, to the entire lore of all of Zyathica. Not to me dabbing my nose, an entirely different thing. Yes, not to me dabbing my nose.
I will let you know that I actually highlighted the lines, and his grief was infinite, but his anger was greater.
His anger greater.
It's very good writing.
Thank you, my dear.
No problem.
In his wisdom, Avova recognized that he would be unable to defeat all 4 of the corruption lords through power alone. Yes, so we will stop reading there so you can understand. So what happens next, Cameramandi, is that Avova does something that had never been heard of, nor seen, nor thought of in the world, in the Eterniverse before. Avova took his essence, merged it with the Zyanthus, used the power to imprison the 4 lords in a thing called the Never Place, and then was no more. And that was the changing of the age. Yes, magnificent tale. Yes, Cameramandi?
Yeah, no, I love. I literally wrote here that it was beautiful. That I thought the entire story was beautiful. We actually have some questions from Belinda.
Oh, yes, please. I will take off my glasses for but a moment. Now, we have to keep going here, right? Because you don't want to just stop with that one
No.
page.
I want to get us through the Eternal
Yes, we'll do
Empire.
that. Yes, because I assume that is why you and Zix Moose had your little conspiracy.
No,
Magnificent Rob!
He literally just sent it to me. It was beautiful. And if anyone else ever wants to send us something like that, we want to incorporate this kind of stuff into our book club.
Bring your characters. Yes. Thomas, you are the most recent. I
Or-
would love to meet Tahoe. Yes.
Or just even if you don't want to do like a whole character thing, you can just take a video of yourself asking a question with
Absolutely.
your cell phone. We love it. We
You
love
could take a picture of yourself dabbing your nose. Yes,
Right,
this is,
exactly.
yes, this is, I will
As we
take that
do.
too. Oh my God, we could get thousands of
Oh my
videos
goodness.
of people dabbing their nose going forward. Okay.
Okay. So
Yes, go ahead.
Belinda wants to know how aware are the gods of Avuva?
Oh, so all of the gods fully aware. So Avova was, of course, their maker, right? Avova spoke the way of all things, which to those who have been around for a while, you know this is the 13th cycle of spell casting. There is only one spell, the way of all things. And the 12th, 11th, and 10th cycles were accessible to many before Avova merged his essence into the Zyathica. But of course, when Avova merged his essence into the Zyathica, that massively increased its power. And this is the thing to understand, right? This is what gave way to the rise of the Aethernic civilization, was that the Zyathica, which was already magnificently powerful, with spells of the 10th, 11th, and 12th cycles, now all of a sudden was available at much greater power and strength, even though there were no more cycles. And humans and gods could not achieve the 13th cycle. So they were very aware of Avova. Is there another question, cameraman?
Yes. How do the gods view each other? For example, do the lawful think that the neutrals are underneath them? Maybe chaotic thinks lawful is just silly.
So listen. So here's the thing. We wanted to be a little more pantheonic and multi-god, not singular god, which is sort of what grew out of a lot of games in the past, right? All of the people who live on the planet of Zyathica, all of the demigods, all of them, they know all of the gods, they worship all of the gods, and even if they do not like them, they respect them. So if someone is coming after you to try to kill you, you very well, even if you are a very good person, might find a temple to slay, the Lord of Assassins, and drop a tithe, asking Slay to stay said assassin's execution, or to perhaps ask that the assassin be killed instead of you. Yes? So these are the things that we wanted to bring, this more multiplicity of interaction. And so is there rivalry amongst the gods? Without question. Without question. It needs to be, because it makes for much more interesting and intriguing lore and much more interesting and intriguing things going on. Are there alliances between gods? Absolutely. Are they strictly defined by alignments? Not at all, right? So gods definitely, alignment is not the only driver of gods in the world of Zyathica. This is such an excellent question, Belinda. So there are many things that drive the godly point of view, if you will, that are not just dictated by their alignments. And this is more the broadening of lore, which we feel is very important to making a better tale. And so even though there are the gods of law and goodness, and they do lean towards law and goodness, there is no lawful stupid in the world of Zyathica. Just as there is no chaotic, totally, I'm just a slayer of all things and I don't want to do anything else except for that, right? Because enlightened self-interest, even for a chaotic evil individual, would tell you that there are better ways sometimes to achieve your means than just going in and just frigging cutting everyone's heads off, right? So this is the nuance that we want to bring. So this is a marvelous question.
Absolutely. And I mean, can you imagine having relationships with these gods for a number of millennia and then having this huge battle, and how personal that would feel?
Well, and again, the gods, if you read the lore, the gods of evil were a little put out because of what was going on, right? So we tried really hard to not have everything just be just this black and white thing, right? We tried to have nuance and interest so that you could understand why are the gods of evil motivated to align with the corruption lords in the first place? Well, frankly, it was the stupidity of the gods of good and the gods of neutrality, right? Now, part of that is because the gods of evil, their worshippers tended to mess with, more complex societies. They tended to create problems, right? So it's all a very complex web, right? Which makes it much better for lore, right? So this is why we did it.
Well, I think that there's like a common theme throughout the book that even though things are good, people get into this complacent thing where it's like it's good for a certain type of people, and then the rest of the people it's not good for. But the people, and I mean, this is just a world thing too. This isn't just a fantasy thing. This is in our own world. It's important to never forget that just because things are good for you, they may not be good for everyone else, and to have
Yes,
compassion.
a very good and moral message
Yep.
to deliver on your birthday, Cameron.
Oh, thank you.
And I agree with it completely.
Okay.
Yes, this is why we try, those of us who have much, to be charitable and kind and help others, right? This is important. All right.
We have a couple more questions.
Oh, yes, go ahead,
Sorry.
please.
Okay, so this one's from Namastacy. Does the Cyanthus flow like the spice? Is that a Dune question? I don't know.
It is a Dune
Okay.
question. Yes,
Yeah.
the Zyanthu's must flow. So Avovar spoke the way of all things and then created the Zyanthu's, which is the energy that makes all creation possible and makes all creation work, right? So we have this, you'll see it in Magica, we have this crazy idea that all of the world is made from these little Lylimic fractals, which are pyramids, and they come together, 20 of them in different combinations of air, fire, earth, and water to create what are called A-limbs, which are icosahedrons, and then those A-limbs are attracted to each other and form matter, right? And all of this is empowered by the Zyanthu's. And so we're actually trying to create somewhat fantastically plausible physics, right? This is the idea. It doesn't have to be off the deep end. We aren't trying to do mathematical equations or any of that kind of stuff, right? Because it wouldn't work, right? But we are trying to make fantastically plausible. So yes, the Zyanthu's must flow. And it does flow in many ways like the spice.
And this is the last question for Melinda. How powerful does worship make the gods? Abuva is gone, so is there a rotating lineup of the most powerful based on worship, or is there a succession order?
So this is magnificent and absolutely true. Worship definitely equates to power. And we have not really defined that fully yet, how we are going to do it. We have a lot of ideas, but we have not produced the Cyclopaedia of the religions, right? The Cyclopaedia Religica, right? A Theologica, whatever we end up calling it, right? So that will be addressed in there and help people to understand, right? And this also explains a little bit of the rivalry of the gods, correct? And so this is kind of what we're doing. But you know, there's going to be different weightings of certain kinds of things, right? So someone who does sacrificing of others, right, to their gods could be giving much power to those gods. And so this is why we want this, right? Because we want this terrible, evil thing going on, because that's what good people do. They go against evil and deal with it, right? Which is most of what these wonderful games are that we play. Sometimes we play some evil, but most of the time it's about overcoming, which is great. I love that. Yes, heroes. Yes, so on this next chapter, it's called Creation Renewed, okay? And this is very important, okay? Because the lords of corruption were not idle in the renewing of the creation, right? And so what happens is all of creation weeps in the aftermath, the loss of Avovar. It's terrible, but all of a sudden they begin to discover all these powers, yes, that they did not have before. The ability, the power is much more great because of Avovar's essence within the Everflow. Okay. Now, it was very important that the nether flow, which was this secret flow that was stuck to Avovar while he slept, and that the four lords sucked some of his power away, right? That flow still existed. Avovar created a crystalline barrier when he merged himself into the Everflow. And that crystalline barrier purified the Everflow from the nether flow. And this is very important to the long-term lore. So then creation is renewed, and we begin to have this marvelous things happen, right? The gods looked about at the Eterniverse and saw that even though the corruption had ceased and indeed been turned back upon itself, that scars remained. Zyathica was also likewise not spared. For the lands had been altered, many places had been burned by fire and brimstone, torn by chaotic magics or broken, and the gods resolved that they would make the life world better. And so they began to work to change those scars. Now, some things could not be changed. Some things, Mount Nefrius remains. Yes, some things in Sundestia that perhaps we will explore in the future remain. The rift, the brokenness of Verdestia, right? The breaking in half of Verdestia remains, and many more. The Jade Mountain, other things like this, right? They are there, right? Festering in the darkness. Right? The Jade Mountain has a marvelous tale that is in Estrenia and what happened over the course of the corruption. All right, so I must read this to you, though, because this is also very important. Meanwhile, far beneath the surface of the world of Zyathica, in the depths of the darkest reaches, a clutch of leathery skinned eggs warmed in a great moist cave. And it came to pass that one and then another were cut open from the inside to bleed steaming, dank, foul-smelling water upon the stone floor. Slowly a taloned hand came forth, and then an arm, and then more. What emerged from those dark and vile cocoons were onyx-skinned terrors of slime and sharp teeth and muscle and menace, with great intelligence behind shining eyes. These had no history in the great making, and were not of the hand of Avova, nor any of the gods. The Thu'ul had been born. Yes, so in there, as they began to be sequestered into the Never Place, the Corruption Lords were not idle, and they created a race of creatures that would hopefully help them to escape their prison.
Oh, that's how that's all intertwined. I was going to ask that.
Yes, this is what we are coming to. Yes, this is
see.
magnificent, right?
So they were brought these. Okay, I love this.
Yes, so now the next chapter is the New Dawn, and it speaks of how all of these wonderful magics and what they do, right? And how they bring it forward, right? And how it changes the world, right? And the gods are not idle, and it's really a wonderful ascendancy, right? As this marvelous abilities and being able to literally change almost anything that you wanted to change, to make almost anything you could think of. And this was not just for wizards of high levels, right? The common person in the Aetheric Empire, now, or some of the other empires, because there were more. There were wars, there's all kinds of stuff that happened to get to the full-on Aetheric Empire, right? But these people all had these magics at their disposal, and many people were not afraid of magics like they are in Zyathica today. And so there was all manner of... Life was pretty idyllic for many. Some were not. This is where you will learn about what happened to the Arachnoids and how they were pushed to Nordruka. This is where you will learn about other groups of people who were alienated and ostracized, and perhaps understand a little bit more their motivations of why they came back later and wanted some payback. Yes, but this is also wonderful for lore, rather than just, this person is evil because they're evil, right? They might not be. They might feel like they got done dirty. You know what I'm saying? As my son Devin would say all the time, right? Coach, don't let them do them dirty. Yes, right, all that. So then we have the next chapter, which is the Aethern Arise, right? So the Aetheric Empire begins this magnificent thing, right? Across the face of Zyathica, and even in the depths beneath the surface, incredible works of magic were crafted. In their studies, the great mages learned that they could wield spells of the 10th, 11th, and even the 12th cycle, and as their learnings grew, so did their prowess. And lo, this new society used its powers to enhance the wondrous achievements and shape of the life world to their liking. They carved mighty mountains, altered the courses of the greatest rivers, and even bent the weather to their wills. They caused the oceans to recede and made their lands more fruitful in bearing of crops, right? It is said that even their architecture, bolstered with spells of creation, was magnificent to behold. Their cities, the picture of unimaginable elegance and beauty, right? Massive towers that raised to the heavens, right? We talked about the flying cities, but those were just magnificent just in flying. But if you were there, if you saw one of these flying cities, the magnificence of the structures, the incredible magic that was weaved within them, people flitting here and there, just literally walking through doors and appearing in other places, right? All of this was just unbelievable, right? And Cameramendi, I don't know if you grabbed this image, right? Did you grab this image?
Let me see if I can find it. I think I have it somewhere.
So this was one of the first images, it's in the book, right? It's on the book to talk about
hold it up.
the Aetheric city of Eternavis right here, which is on Resplanzia. Right, and the only thing I'm going to do, this was done by a magnificent artist we worked with a long time ago, who is named Ferdinand, who I'm actually working with again on a couple of images for the Gloomport. I'm so excited to be working with him again. Anyway, so this is a magnificent image of kind of giving you an idea of what their structures look like. But I even want to modify this in the future, and I'm going to see if Ferdinand would like to do it, and put one of the flying cities in the background. Oh, there it is, yes. I want to put one of the flying cities in the background, because otherwise it really gives you this idea. It needs a little bit of magical stuff, but it was so good, you know, it was just so good. And of course, this is Amostal before the War of Ruin, over the valley where it ultimately ends up resting in the sky, you know, and it's so... it's magnificent, right? So this is the idea, right? So this brings out this incredible thing that's happening. And then, of course, like we are wont to do, We got to
Destroyed
screw it up.
I know. It was heartbreaking to read about this amazing civilization that had been created with these magics, and heartbreaking knowing that just in human nature is that people always want more. Always want more, always want to push, always want, even when you're surrounded by beauty and surrounded literally with magic.
Just magnificence, right? It's not even comprehensible for any of the people who live in Zyathica today. It's hard for us to comprehend, right? I mean, all of the things you can imagine technically that we do now, and the things that technically you might do in the future, this is what the Therns could do. Galganoth, right, their greatest skyship, right, is said that it is rumored that it visited Luneos and perhaps beyond. Right? So this is leaning towards a future that we might bring about, right? Or a past that we might bring forward in the future for those of you who love those kind of let's go into outer space, science fiction, fantasy combo things, right? So we'll see. Yeah. We'll see what happens. But this is the Shadows cast. This is the next chapter, right? All right. This is very important. It began in quiet conversations and dark pacts. Mistrust was sown, and conflict was stirred. The first of those affected were the Elvish folk and the Dwarvish people. And there was a conflict between them that caused literally the beginning of the schism that ultimately eliminated or had the dwarves disembark, say, we are done with the Athenic Empire. We are not going to be a part of it anymore. Now, it did not cause major wars. There was some little skirmishes and little wars, but it did not cause major wars. The dwarves just said, we don't like what you're doing with these magics, in particular the humans and the elves, right? We don't like what you're doing with these magics, but also there was this other tale and this terrible thing that happened that caused a couple of deaths of very important people, and this, you know, as often can happen, this caused some consternation and was sort of the catalyst, right, that sort of blew it apart. So the dwarvish folk, both the Deeping and the Crown Dwarves, they both sort of walked away. Said, we're not going to do this anymore.
I really like this comment from Harry. The Therns weren't all that good. They were conquerors.
Truly, yes. Harry, you're right. The civilization was magnificent, but honestly, some of the things that they did were reprehensible, right? The Arachnoids were terribly mistreated, right? And others, right? You will, as we progress through the tales of the other continents, we'll learn about other groups and individuals who perhaps were eliminated or perhaps pushed away or, you know, set aside because the Therns didn't deem them worthy for one reason or another, right? Which is pretty bad, right? You know, this is a terrible thing.
It's interesting because if you read this history from the perspective of those races, it's going to be an entirely different.
Completely different.
These are the villains.
Yes, that's right. They are the villains. And this is the idea, right?
Yes.
This is what makes for a marvelous tale because honestly, in any kind of a conquering society, you know, it is hard to say that they are pure. Right, it is difficult to say that. So anyway, let us continue. So,
we are at 11 o'clock.
Oh, we are. So this next chapter is called The Shadows. We're killing ourselves right now. We're late, cameraman.
I know.
I'm sorry that we are slow on this, my friends.
We'll get the pace down.
Well, also,
yes.
I do want to say
there's a lot of history here,
and this is important because the foundation of everything is with this lore. Right? The understanding of why the Xanthus is the way it is, understanding of why the world is the way it is, understanding of why people the common folk are afraid of magic, understanding why they fear people who have blood touches, understanding why Nordruka invaded Kalanta, right? Understanding things that you will find out in Sundestia. All of this goes back to this, right? Understanding why the Thu'ul are doing what they are doing. Yes, all of this comes back to this. And this is I've read much. And for those of you who are aspiring writers, for those of you who want to be authors, I have read much about those who try to create things in fantastical worlds that they have created of their own. And the importance of it having plausibility, real, true, fantastical plausibility is pivotal in the long running of the world. Because if you don't have that, all kinds of things begin to happen and people start having those moments of they can't suspend their disbelief anymore. And so our goal has always been and will always continue to be that we are going to do our utmost to enable the continuation of the suspension of disbelief, because that is what makes for great tales, great adventures, and wonderful tables, wonderful online experiences, all of this. So the Ventenium Alunax.
There's so much history just in these 20 pages.
Well, the thing is, okay, so
it sets everything up.
I'm pretty serious about world building and I've read a lot. In fact, maybe Mike, maybe we can even talk about this a little bit, because you've been exposed to all of this for a long, long time. So maybe we can even talk about this a little bit. So one of the things that I read about world building, and one of the reasons why Tolkien was so breakthrough at the time that he did it, was he actually spent the time to really craft what was the history, how was it created, how does all these things work, right? All of this stuff. And one of the things that even though I'd spent a lot of time world building of my own, right, in my own home games and all of this stuff through the years, I determined at the beginning, when we were going to all get together and start this crazy journey, that we were going to have a world that made sense, a world that fantastically made sense, that we were going to have a world that was steeped in a good history that also made sense as to why things were today, right? And that was the beginning. And I actually wrote the Ventenium Alunax, I think in this section in 2017, 2018, right as we were beginning this process, because it was so important that we have this wonderful history. And of course, it sets up everything, right? It sets up as you already know, if you were here last time, there was this war that happened between the gods and themselves at first, which was then revealed that the power behind the gods, that were the gods of evil, that were frustrated and angry at the gods of good and neutrality, that the power behind them was actually these four lords of corruption. And they actually deceived the gods of evil, and the gods of evil were put in the same boat with the other gods. They weren't friends of the lords of corruption. And Avovar was sleeping, and then Avovar woke, and there was a big battle between Avovar and the lords of corruption. And in the end, it appeared, right, that there was no way that Avovar would prevail. And so Avovar did the unthinkable. Avovar used the Zyathics, merged his spirit into the Zyathics, radically increasing the Zyathusic power. He encased the nether flow, this terrible corrupting flow that was in there, into a crystalline barrier, and then used the power that he had to imprison the four lords of corruption in the nether place, and ultimately ceased to be in that moment. And so this is this magnificent history, right? And then, of course, in the Gods' War, 8 of the gods were killed. And there is a lot of lore that people are surmising. There's some interesting prophecy that you find in a couple of our adventures and our books and things like that speak of this 9 that are returning. And it is definitely still a tale, still in the telling, but some have surmised that it is the 8 gods who are coming back in a new form or new thing, right? But the question is, why are there 9? And this is a mystery that still remains, though some have speculated. We will see how it transpires. But in the end, what this marvelously creates, right, is this deific thing where you have the lords of corruption, you have the gods who are at odds sometimes with themselves, right? The 4 lords, and then what of this mysterious other group that is coming, which kind of gives us a trilateral thing, right, in this godly thing that's going on. So what is important to understand is that after Avovar did this, the Eterns, they rose, right? It was magnificent because the Zyathics had never been so powerful, right? It was able to let them do things that they never even imagined, right? The flying cities, right? The sky-ships, Garganath, right? Amastal, right? Telson Throd, which is now turned over and literally lies in ruin in the center of the Republic of Zoranthia. So all of these things they were able to do. And then, of course, we learned at the end of the war that the Thu'ul had been created by the corruption lords. And so we come to the next section. Now, this is important. I'm not wearing my glasses.
You don't have to read, and we don't have that much time anyways because we have to get talking to David. All right.
I will do this. But so remember that the Whisperer came to the gods originally and began to talk to the gods and that is how the gods of evil determined to sort of follow through with the lords of corruption, right? And that is how all of this sort of began. But now when you read in the Shadows Cast, you will read that the Whisperer returns. And there is conflict within the Eternic Empire. And this is on page 12. And then, of course, I showed the image of the Eternic thing, which is right here, right? I showed this last week, which is magnificent, give you an idea of this. I'm actually going to have some rework done to that image eventually. And then we come to a section that is very important. about Galcionthros. Now Galcionthros was the greatest of the human mages, and in truth the greatest wizard of that time. He was also of a much advanced age, and the only thing he wished for more than greater power was immortality. Thus in his dreams Galcionthros told the whisperer that he would do anything to achieve that which the voice had promised him. 'Twas then that a group of cowed strangers arrived in the arcane tower of Galcionthros seeking an audience with the wizard. And they had brought gifts. Those gifts were tomes that spoke of magics, the like of which Galcionthros had never thought about nor experienced. Some believe they were the Thule, and those magics required the use of the Netherflow. And the next chapter is called The Return of Ruin. And here we begin to experience, we begin to understand how it happens, right? What goes on and how ultimately the woe of ruin occurs. And this is a marvelous read. I'm not going to read it for obvious reasons because we want to spend some time with Mike this morning. But if you have not read to this place, when you start getting to page 15 and 16, then you start seeing about the darkest days and how all of this happened and what occurred and how in the end the world was nearly obliterated. But actually, it was the three gods of magic that saved all things, which is a tale still to be told. How have I done, cameraman? Because we can definitely finish this. We can do the darkest days and Zyathica today next week.
Yeah, so that's fine. So basically, what happened, my understanding, so they believe it's the Thule, or is it confirmed that it's the Thule? Or is it the Valandians? Certain James might have
the
suggested.
Valandians were not there at that time. Yes, there was the Athenic Empire was all. The Valandians actually arose out of the ashes, right? So the Zoldothran was an Athenic mage, and as is said about Lord Kalnovic, right? And there are others. Some believe that the emperor of the So-Waiwun Empire in Estrenia was also one, and that there may be even at the helm of the Sothic people in Zustrenia, in Zustrenia, there may also be some Athenic mages because some survived, right? Some survived the woe, and so this is all kind of mixed up in the history.
And basically, what happened was, how do you say
Galcionthros? Galcionthros.
Yeah, just his decisions and then corrupt people around him.
Yes.
Caused the ruination of Avuva's sacrifice.
That's correct. Caused the crystalline barrier. This was the key to the whole thing. What needed to happen was that crystalline barrier that Avuva had created around the Netherflow that needed to be breached. And it was indeed. And that is what allowed many things to happen that Avuva would never have intended. So the Netherflow now began to seep back into the Zyanthus, and of course that would mean into all of creation, for the Zyanthus is all things, so the energy of all things, right? And then, of course, what we find out a little later as we read is that there are cracks now in the walls of the Never place, where the four lords of corruption are interred. And so this is all set up, this magnificent stew and this mystery of the 9 that are coming, and this question of the four lords of corruption, and they are all opposed, right? Likely all opposed. We'll see about the 9, but they are likely all opposed, which gives us a wonderful thing going on in the pantheon and the eterniverse that is beyond just the life world. So this is magnificent. I hope you are loving the read. I am loving the read. I think it has been fantastic. I am not the only one solely responsible for this. We had help with AJ and others who helped make it even better. And I hope that that is steeping you in the history of all things and the world of Zyathica.
Yeah, and then after this terrible event happens, Responsia is like destroyed.
So Responsia was the central continent.
I think I have a picture.
Yes, it was the central continent. It's actually here on the map too. If you can show it, I can definitely flash it, right?
I don't have it.
Don't worry, it's right here. So on the world map, you can see the great sort of purpling place in the middle. This is Responsia. And Resplansia was the Eternic continent. Even though the Eternic continent, the Eternic Empire spanned much of the globe and had a presence on every continent, the Eterns were, they could do almost anything, right? And so really to live in Resplansia or to live on one of the flying cities was really sort of the pinnacle. And so everybody wanted to do that. They didn't want to go spread out all over the world. There weren't that many, right? But there were pockets of the Eternic Empire everywhere. And so what happened was, of course, all the magics, all the high magics were focused in Resplansia. And when the War of Ruin happened, of course, the high magics were destroyed and corrupted first. And it caused all manner of terrifying calamity in Resplansia. And of course, down the road, we hope that there will be adventures in Resplansia, but we will see. For those are all tales still in the telling, Cameraman D.
I have a couple comments.
Yes, and, please.
I like this one from Alexander. I think of the never place as more of a never when.
Oh yeah, I think that's kind of true, Alexander. Yeah. I think that is true. It was basically trying to get them out of everything, right? That was the idea, right? Get them out of all things. So it wasn't the perfect solution, but it was a good one. Unfortunately, Avovar did not know about the Thu'ul and the other plan. It seems the corruption lords had a little backup plan of their own, so interesting. Yes. Excellent, Alexander.
I had a comment from Belinda that I thought it was funny because the bot said that they were holding the comment because of bullying, but it was just that
Belinda, you're so mean.
She was calling Crux creepy.
You're so mean.
She said, now it's creepy Crux.
Creepy Crux.
And the bot was like, this is bullying. And it's like, no. Okay, and then we had a question from Jim. Are you thinking about or tinkering with an idea for a Planescape kind of realm and story?
So this eventually is in our future. We want to be able to do this. This was the idea behind the creation of Galganath and some of the other things that come from the Eternic Empire. And in Magicka, you'll read a little bit more about Galganath and the skyship, the massive skyship that was supposed to be there, because people like this, right? And we don't want to just necessarily confine people. There is room to do a Planescape thing in the Eterniverse. And assuming that we continue on our success and keep going forward the way we're going, this is definitely something we would like to do. A lot of people have asked.
Okay, and then just in terms of like we have like kind of the aftermath of what happened with the woe, but what were some like immediate consequences that happened with the woe?
So obviously the whole entire world of Zyathica and the Eterniverse began to crumble. Literally what had happened, right? If you think about it, Avovar spoke the way of all things, which is the only 13th level spell. There is no other spell of the 13th level, none. And this, speaking of the way of all things, was the beginning of the creation. And then investing or pushing into, right, the four elements into the void, right, along with the way of all things, which caused the great making. So this was the beginning. There, I have lost my camera, but have I lost audio, cameraman?
No, your audio is still good.
Okay, so remind me of the question. Just make sure I don't go too far.
Just if there was any immediate, what were the immediate consequences?
So what happened was when the Netherflow was created by the Four Lords of Corruption to actually siphon power from the Creator. This was the idea. And so they empowered themselves through the siphoning of power from the Creator. And this was the creation of the Netherflow. Now, what happened was when the war began, the Netherflow now became a part of the Xyanthus. This was all the Corruption Lord's plan, to corrupt everything. And then everything began to crumble. Everything began to fall. Everything began to be corrupted entirely. And when I say corrupted entirely, it is terrifying what happened. All the spells of the 10th, 11th, and 12th cycles were no longer available to any of the mortals nor the gods. So even the Eterniverse, right, all the planes of existence, all of them began to unmake, right? This was the thing. And there's some interesting stuff in Magicka about this. When you see the Magicka book, which is magnificent, when you see it, you'll see some of these in here, some of this information that is in there as we continue to expand and expound upon the lore. And so what happened is all of this stuff began to fall apart, to literally revert back, right? But at the same time, it was being tainted by this horrific substance, this nether flow, right? This anti-Zionthus, if you want to call it that, right? And it began to corrupt the whole thing. And this began to warp people, turn them into other things. Strange creatures began to make buildings not just fall down and be destroyed, but literally turned into other things, right? Because this is the idea of corruption. It is not necessarily all like what Nu'ul desires, which is the emptiness of all things, a return to the void, right? There are other corruption lords, right? There is Anakria, right, who wants chaos, right? All of this stuff. And so this is why Responsia, which is now Creepy Crooks, is so magnificent. Because it has all of this going on in just massively higher level than the rest of the world. But it affected the rest of the world. It affected beneath, right? In the Underdelve, which is called the Zion-Dune, right? Stone came to life. This is where they believe the Illumines came from, the magical trees, the glowing things that are down there. All kinds of things began to change and become different because of this. And so, did I do a good job? Was that a good answer?
That was a great answer.
Okay, but marvelous.
And so next week we'll tackle the aftermath and the rebuilding. And then I think we're going to be done and move on to the next section of...
Marvelous.
Yeah.
So those of you who've been around for a little bit know that we have begun the book club. Now, this is also beginning our reading stuff. So Cameramandy and I apologize, I have to wear these glasses. Cameramandy's going to give me some cool glasses that go better with wizardly look. But right now, I got to wear something or I can't see, right? So, but this is our first book. This is the world book. It is called the Wy'rded World. It is Cyclopaedia Zyathica Volume 1. And at the beginning of the Cyclopaedia Zyathica Volume 1, there is a section called the Chronicles of the Ventenium Alunax. And the Chronicles of the Ventenium Alunax hold all of the history of what happened in the world from the creation of all things by Avo'Va, all the way through the Gods' War, all the way through up until the present day. And we are reading through this as part of the book club because a lot of people said they'd like to kind of go through it with us. And so that's what we're doing. So we are just talking about the most recent terrible cataclysm that affected the world of Zyathica, which is called the Woe of Ruin. And it's very important for everyone who's new to understand that Zyathica is a post-apocalyptic magic world. There is not really technology in any way we would think of technology in this world. It is constructed of a very different structure, all kinds of things, how matter works, how energy works, all of that is different. And we did honestly try to sort of found the world with all of that kind of stuff. Because in world creation, if you're trying to really make a world, you need all of the history, at least in some measure, for people to be able to call back upon and explain why the world is like it is today. So right now we have talked about a circumstance that happened. So just really quickly to go back, in the beginning of the creation of all things, 4 sparks of foulness appeared at the edge of the void space during the creation by Avo'Va, and they were not of his making nor of his intent. And they slipped off into the furthest reaches of the void and began to grow and coalesce as the creation continued its making. And then as time progressed, these 4 sparks became the 4 lords of corruption, which for those who want a deeper understanding, they are basically the antithesis of creation. They are uncreation. And that is the 4 lords of corruption. And these, after Avo'Va had finished the creation of all things, created the gods, created the life world of Zyathica, created the Eterniverse and all of the things in the void space, he slept. Now the Zionthus is the energy that makes all things possible. The Zionthus is indeed magic. Avo'Va created all of this using the Zionthus, which was the energy, and the 4 elements. And all of creation was made. And then Avo'Va was tired, and so Avo'Va slept. Now in his slumber, the 4 lords of corruption created another flow of the Zionthus, a corrupted flow called the nether flow. And this they actually used to siphon power from Avovar while he slept. And thus began their strategy to corrupt all things. And what happened is, as that continued, they began to get more and more powerful, even more powerful than the gods. And then, to enact their plan, they began to whisper to the gods themselves that they could be greater than Avovar, that they should be greater than Avovar. All of this came through, and at the same time, the gods of evil were feeling a little put out by how the gods of neutrality and the gods of goodness were sort of doing things that were making the evil gods get kind of pushed away. Now, because worship matters in the world of Zyathica to give godly powers, as the evil gods were diminished, the good and neutral gods got more power. And this vexed the evil gods. And so when the whisperer whispered in their ears, they listened. And this was the beginning of the gods' war, even though none knew, until finally it came to the cataclysm, right? And then there was this massive battle, right? And gods died, and the world was nearly destroyed, and all of the gods cried out. And Avovar awoke. And the battle between the four lords of corruption and Avovar was epic. It was transcendent. There has never been anything like it since, and will never be again. But Avovar realized he could not prevail over the four lords. And so, in a desperate act, Avovar took himself, his spirit, the being that he was, who had always been, and merged his being into the Zyanthus to give him more power than he had ever had, and to enhance the Zyanthus to levels it had never been before. And he used that power to imprison the four lords of corruption within the Never Place. And then he ceased to be. And that is the world that we live in now. And as time progressed, something else terrible happened. Because the whisperers returned and spoke to a worldly wizard of the Aethernic civilization named Galcianthros. And Galcianthros, who wished to live forever but not live in undeath, listened to the whisperers. And thus were the seeds sown for the woe of ruin. And that is where we are right now. Is that correct, Cameramendi?
I don't know, because I was looking into something with Moobot. Everyone, just make sure that you're putting in hashtag capital B book club, capital C. So, yeah, so, and I'll look into
how it doesn't have to be case sensitive.
Yes, so I will look into that.
Hashtag capital B-O-O-K, capital B-O-O-K, capital C, L-U-B.
Yes.
Hashtag book club.
Anyway, where we are at in the woe, I don't know if, I'm so sorry that I wasn't able to listen last section,
No,
is that they had just destroyed the wizard, the evil wizard had just tried to take all the magic for himself.
That is correct.
Yes, and then we are in the aftermath where a lot of people were displaced, and there was a lot of...
and this was the cataclysm that nearly destroyed the Zyanthus, that destroyed the Aethernic civilization, that brought massive corruption to the world of Zyathica. Yes, and the planes, the godly realms. And this chapter on page 16 is called The Darkest Days. The horrific cataclysm that would come to be known as the Woe of Ruin destroyed the entire Aethernic civilization, burying all they had created in great masses of rubble and ruin and death. With nowhere else to go, the remnants of the races fled to the outskirts of the now devastated lands to avoid the dark and tainted places where their great cities once stood. The gnomes, the Orokanoids, the humans, all of them fled to the outskirts, the fringes, to avoid the corruption. And the corruption seeded within the world. And indeed, it still seeds to this day. It permeates every rock, every blade of grass, every drop of water, and is indeed slowly destroying all of the creation. Now, what happened in the aftermath, on page 17, is the chapter called The Corollary of Ruin. By the way, is there any questions? Does anybody have any questions?
I do actually have some questions
Yes,
from
let's do that real
Belinda.
quick. Yes.
Actually on page 17. After the woe, it says that the Sarth had to fight with clans of surface-dwelling demi-humans. Who were they?
We will have to wait a little bit on that tale, Belinda, when we do Zustrenia. But there is very interesting lore in Zustrenia that is taken from South and Central American and even somewhat some North American lore before the folks who came from Europe and kind of changed things here, right? So this lore is magnificent, and it is going to be based and steeped in that lore. And so there are certain things that we have identified that we want to, repurpose, right? Like we've mashed up everything already. And but there were human clans, but there were other clans that were there as well. And so we are excited to bring that to the table and in the future when we do Zustrenia. But for right now, it is a tale still in the telling, my dear. Indeed it is. Another question, Cameramandy.
Yes. Okay. Have we talked about Galcianthras?
I have talked some, but I can
Okay.
speak to Galcianthras if someone has a question.
Well, here the question is: it describes the visitors to Galcianthras as onyx-skinned. Was this some of the Thule?
That is an excellent question and an excellent hypothesis, though it is unconfirmed who they actually were.
And this is actually like a good question that follows up. Who were the other 5 wizards that he used? Because Galcianthras was the person who tried to destroy or tried to take the power for himself. So who were these other 5 people that he managed to convince to go along with him?
There were other very powerful wizards, all of them human, but we have not written of them yet. Now, there were others that we have written of who abandoned Galcianthras in the tale. One of them is Cal Novik, who is now the Lich Lord of the Vile Desolation. There are also rumors that Zoldathrin Veldrin, yes, the supreme consort in Valandia, was also associated with Galcianthras. And there is another, potentially in Sundestia, who is also affiliated with this one. But that is also a tale in the telling. If the rumors are true, the 5 mages who joined him were also destroyed along with Galcianthras in this terrible spell that was supposed to take all of their lives except for Galcianthras, though the 5 wizards did not know. But we will bring that tale forth because it is marvelous in the future.
Okay, so
Excellent
we're gonna
question.
expand even further.
Well, you'll get some stuff in Magicka as well that is a little bit of expansive lore when you go through there, And this is the wonderment of the tale, right? Is over time we tell more of the tale, right? And I think it makes it fun for people to know and wonder. But yes, it is likely, going back to the first question, that the visitors who came to Galcianthras could have been the Thule, who are the agents of the 4 lords on the planet of Zyathica.
All right, and I have one more question, but we will hold that until after we talk about some of the consequences.
Yes.
Because it's very interesting how this event reshaped the entire world of
Indeed.
Zyathica,
Indeed.
and then on top of that, reshaped and displaced so many different races, so many different people, lost at sea because of the
Yes.
massive waves that were created. So all these
The population was devastated.
Yes.
Yes, just dramatically reduced. And of course, this happened in the plains as well, right? All the godly realms were affected by this dramatically. In fact, the truth be told, were it not for Evoke, Infiorni, and Sha'adar, who are the 3 lords of magic, the gods of magic, who had, in particular, between Infiorni and Evoke versus Sha'adar, there was enmity because this was right. This was the gods' war was part of this problem, right? There was great enmity between them, but they went in together into the halls of the making. And they literally separated the Zyanthus, which had been one flow up before that which was infected with the nether flow. They literally separated it into 3 distinct different flows, right? And tried to repair a crystalline barrier that Avovar had put around the nether flow to protect the rest of the Xanthus from that flow.
Well, I think like these gods know the sacrifice that Aviva had made,
Yes.
and to see it all destroyed, after he had sacrificed himself, I mean, that would be devastating.
And they're also looking at the possibility of themselves being corrupted and destroyed, right? This is because there's only one of the lords of corruption that wants to unmake everything fully, right? All the other 3 want to sort of turn it into other stuffs, right? So even the 4 lords, there might be a little bit of enmity between them in certain circumstances, right? So in some ways, maybe they are a marriage of convenience, right? But that is marvelous because we love the tension, right? Anyway, your question is exactly right. So these 3 gods go into the halls of making. They change the font, right? And since the 10th, 11th, and 12th cycles of magic had already been relatively ruined at this point, they were not usable, right? And the 13th cycle of magic is basically one spell, which is the way of all things. It is believed that Galcianthros did indeed cast a 12th level, 12th casting, all right, which is called the Unmaking. And that is what happened in that woe of ruin and what nearly destroyed all things. It cracked the crystalline barrier that Avovar had put in place because he needed the nether flow to cast that spell. It caused the 4 lords of corruption's never place, the walls, to also form cracks, which is why Anacria smiled when she looked at the walls and said it was only a matter of time now. Yes. And so they went in, they did this deed, they were able to restore. Question?
David, he wants to know, did they change the font to Comic Sans or Papyrus?
Excellent question.
Neither, because they're
It was
both
actually
wrong.
Blackbeard. Yes.
And we have another really good question too before we go from Thomas. Did they change? Oh, sorry, I was reading his again. Okay, when did you start writing Zyathica? Like, when did the lore start coming together?
So the original stuff came around. I'd been playing, as many of you know, we played the Forgotten Realms for many years. Ed Greenwood is I've said it many times, is my hero, and really a pioneer in world building. And if you were around in those days and you read the Dragon magazine and you read about some of the pre-postings that Ed had in the Dragon, and then of course they published Waterdeep in the North, which was the first real supplement that was the Forgotten Realms and all of this stuff. But for me, I never liked things like firearms and technology as it is in our world, in my world. I didn't really love that stuff.
I mean, I agree with you because to me, I played the game, whatever I'm just saying. I played D&D because I like to kind of escape that stuff. Like, it's like coming up with creative solutions. Yeah, creative solutions in a different world. Mm-hmm.
So a long time ago, I began to think about what it would have mean if magic had been somehow destroyed or messed with. And there was others. This is not like some unique idea with Kim, Alphinius. Right. And
there's no such thing as a unique idea in the fantasy world these days. It's just your spin on what it is. Yes. It's your thought. Yeah.
So anyway, it began a long time ago. But then when we actually determined that we were going to publish, we originally were going to put our materials in the Forgotten Realms because we wanted to work with folks at Drive-Thru RPG and do all that kind of stuff. But the problem is that based on their terms and conditions, there are things that you basically give up ownership to that, frankly, I did not want us to give up ownership for those materials. And all of you should make sure when you read those terms and conditions of any of these places to make sure that you aren't really giving up something that might be very special to you that you will never have.
Including ours.
Including ours, yeah, absolutely. But we're pretty, that we're very forthright about that, right? Like I tell people all the time, if you're going to contribute something to our world, right? If you're going to do it, we're going to have that. So don't give us anything that you think is special. There are thousands and thousands of ideas that percolate through your head. Which are the special ones? Put that in your special box. Keep them there for you. The ones you want to have fun with that you are not so concerned about, if you want to give a couple of those to us and have them get put in our materials and get something special in return, we would love that.
We are going totally off track, though.
I know. All right.
Okay.
So we were talking about the gods. They went in. Now, this is very important because there are many who talk about the separation of the three flows, right? The flow into three, right? Many people who talk about this. And the reason why it is kind of important is because there are those who wish, Zoldathrin Vildreen being one of them, who wish to reunite the three flows and try to bring back the 10th, 11th, and 12th casts. That is very important, because that is the only way that those will ever be able to be brought back. But in bringing back the 10th, 11th, and 12th casts, it enables, if that were to be achieved, it enables one to then cast the 12th level spell, the Unmaking. And so the question remains, is it really true that the 10th, 11th, and 12th cycles are ruined and never to be used again, never can be used again? Or is it the intention of the three gods of magic that they never be used again, even though they might be?
That is actually kind of an intriguing, thing to play with. And I think it just depends on what table you're at. And so here's the thing, is I'm reading it's a TTRPG story. It's called The Wandering Inn. And they have kind of a similar situation with the highest level of magic being out of reach. I don't get to have any say in what happens in that book series. I just get to enjoy it. But with this, yes, the lore is going to be written, but then you have the permission as the GM to take the lore and do with it what you will. So if you want to unlock those crazy levels of magic at your table, maybe you do.
Perhaps someday.
Maybe,
Perhaps we will even run an adventure to do that. But anyway, the question was, when did this all begin? So it began probably 20 years ago, as I began to ponder a post-apocalyptic magic world. Then, as we began to write in earnest in 2017 and 2018, as we began to do that, that was the first thing that I wrote. I wrote that this chronicles of the Ventenium Alunax, because again, having read about world building and the importance of history and why Tolkien did what Tolkien did with all of the Silmarillion stuff and all of that, and I mean, even to the point of creating languages, right, and all of this stuff, really helped make the world feel more real. And that is the goal here. The goal here is, when those players sit down at your table, we want to give them a world that feels real, because we want to help them suspend that disbelief. We want them to be there, to be in this place, right? This is what I love at my table when I have this happening with my players. It doesn't happen all the time, right? Because you're joking sometimes and having fun sometimes. But certainly on some of these times, you are in the midst of this and they are there, right? And that is a magnificent, magnificent game.
And that's something that, imagine even if you're starting the Red Star Rising campaign and one of your Hanatas, that's something they want to get their teeth into. They're starting out as a level 1 and they're like, I want to help reclaim maybe in the future these magics that have been lost. They heard a tale, they heard a lore, these whispers.
Can I interrupt you for a real second?
Yeah,
I want to hear this. Check this out, cameraman.
Yes.
So the Hanatas, you all know I love them, and they're born of my heart, and dedicated in particular to one of my children, and all kinds of stuff about the Hanatas that are magnificent to me. But one of the things that's really magnificent about the Hanatas is this concept of the blood touch and how it permeates everything. And there's more tales to be told on this, my friends, many more. Because as I've said a few times before, many blame the blood touch on the woe of ruin. They believe it is a spawn of corruption, if you will. But for those with an eye, for those who have spent time in the tale, they will realize that Xylea lived before the woe of ruin. And indeed, a few blood-touched people also lived before the woe. And this is the kind of wonderful thing that if you let it out slowly to your players who have blood touches, if you let these kinds of things slip slowly, it just makes their eyes get wide as they ponder, what does this mean? And that is the mystery of wonderment. It is the best. Ha-ha! Yes, cameraman.
Indeed. Well, okay, this is a great conversation. We do have to actually finish up the Ventenium.
I'm going to finish it right now. I'm going to finish it right now.
Okay.
So we are now in the 4th age. This is on page 18. And I'll read this because we are just about done. I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read a little bit of it. And so, more than 1,200 years, which we also call annums in the world of Zyathica, And so more than 1,200 years following the sundering of the woe of ruin, Zyathica has reached a tense stability. Blood touches continue to occur with greater frequency in every generation, as the twisted magic seeping from crooks and etheric ruins on other continents continue to permeate all things. This gradual perversion of the mortal races is what ultimately served as the catalyst for the formation of the Hanatas, as recounted in the legend of Xylea and other Hanatas writings. These warped forces are also at fault for the rise of ever more obscure and terrifying monsters that stalk the wilds and the depths of the world. And here are the last two paragraphs. Only time will reveal what lies in store for the peoples of the Wy'rded world. If the sayings of the prophets are to be believed, the years to come will bring great fears and dangers to Zyathica. What these are, however, are spoken of in veiled and mysterious words, as the discourses of prophecy often are. One thing is unequivocally clear. The peoples of the world of Zyathica face a dark and uncertain future. Many terrible circumstances and frightening events are taking place, even as these words are being written. Nefarious powers and fearful principalities seek their own ends without regard to the harm they do. Secret societies and dark practitioners strive to unlock the ancient and vile corruption magics with little concern for the consequences of their actions. Strange portents point to a dramatic reversing of the status quo, while the venality, apathy, greed, and avarice sap the life from the nation-states and sovereignties of the world. And meanwhile, in the darkest depths, the vile Thu'ul slowly spread their horrific depravity and grotesque perversions to more and more of those residing in the Zyandun. It is certainly a most dangerous and marvelous time. And that is the end of the Chronicles of the Ventenium Alunax, my friends. And next we will talk a little bit about the magic of Zyathica.
We did have one more question from Belinda.
Oh, please. Anybody who has questions, throw them out, and we will be done after that.
So yeah, I think like the important takeaway from this section of the book is that the ripples from what occurred with the woe is still out there in the world. Certain alliances have been formed between different groups of people based on terrible happenings that happened. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway. But this is an observation that Belinda had. It seems like the Thu'ul and the High Elves might be an interesting team up. Seems like the High Elves might be one of the more corruptible of the races. That seems to be hinted at by the cover of East for Destia.
Well, there is certainly Zoldathrin Vildreen, who is of High Elven blood. And Zoldathrin, it is fairly clear to those who observe, there is some connection between him, the other two consorts, and the Thu'ul. And of course, there's another thing that's going on for those who've read a little bit in East for Destia, which is that somehow Zoldathrin and the other two consorts are doing something with blood-touched people to prolong their lives. But that is a tale you must read for yourself.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to mention that the High Elves, they lost very much because they had created these huge cities with the high magics. And it does seem like they'd go to any lengths to try and reclaim some of that past glory.
I think, again, they feel they are marginalized people, right? That is what they feel, right? They are truly, because many who are not of human descent blame the humans for the woe of ruin because of Gausianthros being human, right? There are enmities between certain groups. There's history of enmity between the Dwarvish folk and the High Elven folk in particular, and so there's a lot of tension, right? But this is what you want when you're making a world, right? This is this is why we have the 72 gods, and not all of them get along, right? This is why we have the missing Avovar and the Four Lords of Corruption. And even within the Four Lords of Corruption, there could be enmity, right? This is the idea, right? And then there is this mysterious thing, the Nine, that are in prophecies that are said to be returning, which is spoken of a little bit in the Red Star Rising campaign. And so this begins to bring this wonderful tension, all of these different aspects, and that is what brings the adventure, because there's lots of bad guys for our wonderful heroes to come against and deal them a blow. Yes, ha ha! 2 heroes.
Or to playing a villain campaign.
Oh, you villains. I've said this many times. We experimented with this evil thing. You know, it always ended up with the damn characters killing each other, or people who played evil characters not really being evil, right? So we kind of, and again, for me, alignments are sort of guidelines, right? There, I do an alignment spectrum if I was going to create a game, right? There'd be a spectrum that you would kind of live within that sort of guides your principles of your character, because that was the idea behind it in the first place, was how does my character act, and to kind of give the game master, this is how they're going to act generally, so they couldn't just be all crazy all the time, right? Do all kind of stupid things that didn't make sense in the scope of their character.
Okay, well, this was a great conversation. This was a fun end to our trip into the Ventenium Alunax, and
we're going to do magic next, right? Is that the plan, or do you want to do something else?
No, the next one, we have to go into the next chapter.
Yes, that's my plan. We'll talk. So read chapter 2, which is in here, right? Which is in this Cyclopaedia Zyathica.
Yep.
And this will be wonderful because we're doing Magicka at the same time. And so when you look at the Zyanthu's, which is this chapter right here, when you look at the Zyanthu's, then you'll be able to get a little bit of background and grounding in this stuff. And then when you get Magicka, you'll be like, oh my goodness, it's really, all of our books, because we're getting better ourselves, right? We get better ourselves. All of our books, I think, keep getting better as we progress. Although I think they are all wonderful. Magicka is magnificent. And I think many are going to love it.